Hello everyone. So I'm making this video to discuss the importance of understanding. Understanding can mean self-understanding, but not only that, really any kind of understanding. I want to explain the idea that, in my opinion, understanding is the most important thing. So it's really all about understanding ourselves, but understanding in general. And in some way, everything we do is kind of the result of our understanding. So I will start with a quote that is not from me, but I think is really, really good. It's very correct. And it's the idea that if you judge, you don't understand. And if you don't understand, you judge. When you judge something or someone, effectively what you're doing is you stop trying to understand. You just take that thing, give it a label, and put it in a box and forget about it. So judgment is the opposite of understanding. And that's why it's so important to drop those stories, the filters, the conditioning, because they don't allow us to think clearly. They don't allow us to understand. So you cannot really understand if your reality is distorted by those stories. So the first step in understanding, in increasing our understanding, is to remove the stories, that are based on, let's say, incorrect or bad, wrong assumptions. So to remove those stories that are based on nothing, they are just stories. The judgments, the assumptions, the stories. So a lot of judgments originate from those stories because we are effectively comparing the reality with the stories, and then we express a judgment within this comparison. So we have the reality, we have the stories, they are different, and so we express a judgment about this difference. But in general, even without the stories, understanding is important. So even once the stories have been removed, understanding is very important. It's probably the most important thing, both self-understanding and understanding in general. So it's not really that so there is no specific purpose. It's not that the purpose of understanding is not to judge. The opposite is probably more true. So judging prevents understanding, because once you judge, you stop understanding. So when we judge something, it's really because we do not understand it, or we do not want to understand it. And usually, if we truly understand something, we do not judge it. So let's say you are judging someone for something they do. But if you think about it, if you were in their body, and you had their parents, and you had their education, and you had their history, and you had their friends, and you went to the same school, if everything had been the same, you would probably be doing the same. Actually, most certainly, you will be doing the same, because if everything was exactly the same, you are in their body, you are born with their body, with their parents. Everything is the same. You have the same experiences, the same friends, the same relationship, everything the same. You will, of course, do the same. So what exactly is the judgment? Is it comparing to a story in your mind of an hypothetical bad reality? Is it comparing to yourself? But why would you compare to yourself? Because you probably have a different body, a different brain, different parents, a different education, a different experiences. So of course you're going to be different. So the judgment starts when the understanding stops, and the understanding starts where the judgment stops. If you truly understand someone, you will never judge them, because you will understand that it's very complex and multidimensional. Whatever they do is the result of a complex set of experience that they had. and in some way you also you operate based on the experience you had. So when you judge in general, you're either comparing to a story or to yourself. Now the story is pure fiction, it's pure imagination, so why would you do that? And when you compare to yourself, why will you compare to yourself? That person has a different body, different parents, different education, different background, different experiences. So why would you compare to yourself? It doesn't really make sense. Now, it's often tempting to judge for multiple reasons. Well, the first one is that if we still have the conditioned mind, if we still have the stories, it's useful. I mean, useful, not really useful, but we use it to validate the stories. So if we have a story that we are a good person, and we are a good person because we do ABCD, when we see someone that is not doing ABCD, we judge them instead of understanding by saying that they're a bad person, and this actually makes us a better person because finally we can identify a bad person according to our story. So that validates our story that we are a good person. So the judgment is used to validate specific stories. Or in general, we can use it to compare with us just to make ourselves feel better. So this guy is, I mean, what is he doing? Like, I'm much better, obviously. So we can use it as a way to validate ourselves. But if we drop the stories and we don't feel this need to validate ourselves, then we don't really need to judge. Judging is just basically deciding to stop trying to understand. And we can instead try to understand. And understanding is much more interesting because by understanding others, we can see if maybe there is a little bit of them in us, even just at the potential level. Let's say some guy steals, but maybe he's starving. Would we have done the same if we were starving? Maybe. Maybe there is a little bit of him in us. Or he killed someone, but maybe he was in a very, very tough situation. Could we have done the same in the same situation? Maybe. So maybe there is a little bit of him in us, even if just at the potential level. And the reverse is also true. Maybe there is a little bit of us in him. So maybe we are very successful and he's a failure, but if a few things had went different, he could have been successful. And maybe we could have been a failure. Or the other way around, maybe he's very successful and we have a failure, we are a failure, but if a few things had been different, it would be the opposite. So when we try to understand, when we start to gain an interest in understanding instead of judging, it makes a big difference. First of all, understanding is in general very interesting because it's an opportunity to truly understand the world around us and our experience and ourselves rather than just living in fictional stories. So there is a real interaction between us and the reality. So we actually directly interact with something that is not a story. There is actually something to learn. From the stories, there is nothing to learn. So when we are interacting just with the stories, we are not learning anything. It's pointless. We are just interacting with a story. There is nothing to learn from the story. It's like what there is to learn from a fictional story. Not much, especially if we made it up ourselves. So, but when we drop the stories, we start to interact with, let's say, reality. We interact with whatever that is, but not a story. So we interact with something which is not a story. And we can start to understand this something, how it works, the mechanics, the rules, the logic, the principles. We can recognize some patterns. We can start to understand how this reality works by understanding. We can also look inside ourselves and try to understand how we work, why we do what we do. And we can also look at others and try to understand what they do, why they do what they do. And we can also recognize that there is a little bit of them in us. and there is a little bit of us in them. So it's interesting to look inside us to understand them better. And it's interesting to look at them to understand ourselves better. So this is the idea, the goal of the understanding. So the understanding is really the key, I think. So because everything else is really a consequence of the understanding. So let's take an example. So a lot of gurus or whatever are going to recommend, to practice certain things, or to maybe put effort in certain things, etc., etc. And it's not necessarily wrong, but the thing is, let's say, will, like strength of will, like determination, or like applying focus, or basically wanting something. So putting a sustained effort in something. Effort cannot really change us. I mean, the only thing that effort can do really is make us do things that we don't want to do. But why would we do things that we don't want to do? Well, could be a story. So because of some story, we do things we don't actually want to do. But in general, effort is not really the solution. All effort is achieving is make us do things we don't want to do. Now, of course, sometimes you have no choice. If you need to earn enough money to pay your rent and your food, and you have to do a job that you hate, then you have no choice. So you will have to put the effort to do something that you don't want to do. But in general, effort is not going to help in understanding, because all effort can do is really make us do things that we don't want to do. So there is no point in putting effort to try to change ourselves, because we are not really going to change from effort. Effort is not going to produce more understanding, and is not going to produce change. Of course, we can use it to force ourselves to do things that we don't want to do for a while, but eventually we will stop. And ideally, we are willing to put effort for a certain amount of time to gain something. So we are willing to do something we dislike, that is, to put the effort to do something we dislike, so that in the future we don't have to do the thing we dislike anymore. Effort doesn't change us. Effort only allows us to do something we don't want to do. So almost everything comes from understanding. For example, doing certain actions that can be qualified as, let's say, good or bad, is really the result of understanding. So there is no point, for example, forcing ourselves to do good actions. Usually we will do that because we are telling ourselves a story that we have to do this because then we are a good guy, or we want to validate an idea or a story about our identity. But why? It's like, why would we force ourselves to do something unless there is a story? But ideally we should try to remove the story. So the actions that matter come from understanding. So let's say it's not through effort, it's not through obligation, it's not through believing that we have to do something. It's really through understanding that we are going to change. So let's say that we are not very kind, we are a very selfish person. This is not going to, and the point is, we shouldn't even want to change it. There is no point in wanting to change it. We just observe, hey, that's what I am a very selfish guy, I only care about myself. But I want to understand myself better. And maybe by looking inside myself, I can realize, oh, but that's why I'm like this. It's because of this and that, etc., etc. I become aware of the reasons why I'm like that. And then maybe I can notice, for example, that maybe other people are not so different than me. They also have feelings, and I can maybe relate to their feeling. I can understand their feeling, I can empathize with them, I can connect with them. And then maybe I can reach a certain degree of understanding of others, where if I do something good for someone, I can actually feel what it feels for them. So I kind of share the feeling. So I do something positive for someone and it makes them feel good, and I share this feeling with them because I can imagine how they feel, I can understand how they feel, and so some of that feeling comes back to me because I can relate to them through more understanding. And that might lead me maybe to do good stuff to others, but not because I put effort in doing it, not because I think I have to do it, not because I think it's important to do it, not because I want to validate some story about how good I am, or I want to force myself to do it. The change only happens through understanding. And all those things, like our actions in general, are the result of our understanding. So either they're the result of effort, where we do something we don't want, but why would we do something we don't want unless it's to satisfy or validate some kind of story? Why will we do it? So it all comes out of understanding. Understanding is really the core thing from which everything else radiates. So our actions, our desires, or what potentially even what we like or what we dislike, not necessarily, but in general, everything that, let's say, comes out from us in terms of actions, of thoughts, of ideas, is really the result of understanding. So it's better, for example, to hate some people rather than pretend or force ourselves to love them. Because once you force yourself, or when you judge, or then you stop trying to understand. You kind of you stop the process of understanding. So if you're not true to yourself, if you are pretending to be something else, someone else, forcing yourself, or just validating your stories, then or judging, then you stop the process of understanding. So the first step for understanding is really to be true to yourself. If you're selfish and you don't care about others, that's completely fine. You don't have to pretend that you care about others. You don't. But then you start, once you accept what you are now, you can then look inside yourself, and maybe you hate a lot of people, but that's perfectly fine. It's a good starting point. Accepting that, let's say you hate many people, maybe you hate your parents, you hate your friends, you hate your boss. You don't have to pretend that you like them. You don't have to force yourself to like them. Because then you will stop the understanding. And also the judgment part also applies to ourselves. We shouldn't judge ourselves. Once we start judging ourselves, we also stop the process of understanding ourselves. So the best thing to do is really to suspend the judgment, to realize that the judgment is what is going to block the understanding. And also the effort, trying to change ourselves through effort because we believe we have to, we should, etc., is also going to block the understanding, because we are going to pretend. Through effort, we are going to pretend. So we hate our parents, our friends, our boss, whatever, but we pretend we like them. We try to convince ourselves that we should like them. And so we stop the process of understanding. We are stuck. Whereas the first step is to understand. Why do we hate our parents? Why do we hate our friends? Why do we hate our boss? And of course, this understanding comes in many steps. Maybe we hate our boss because he's very pushy. And that's the first step of understanding. But then we may understand, well, but he's very pushy because maybe his own boss is very pushy. So now we can empathize with them. Well, yeah, he's pushy with us because someone is pushy with him. So he give us pressure, but that's because maybe he received pressure. So now we kind of empathize with him. We understand him more. Because if you understand, you also empathize. When you judge, you cut the empathy element. So when you judge and you decide to stop understanding, you separate yourself. You're here, the other person is here, there is a clear separation, there is a judgment, and there is no connection. But when you stop judging and you start to understand, you will automatically empathize, because now, initially, there is a separate, you say, oh, my boss is an asshole because he always pressures me to do stuff. There is a clear separation. You're good, he's bad. But as you try to understand and you realize that he maybe himself gets pressured, then you start to empathize with him. Oh, he pressures me because he also gets pressured. You start to understand him. By understanding, you empathize. By empathizing, you understand, and you stop judging. And then, of course, this is just the first step. Then maybe it can be a million other things, but it's like that was just an example about the boss pressuring. So maybe the parents behave in a certain way, but then maybe we can understand why they behave in a certain way. And when we understand why, we stop judging, and we empathize because we understand, and we also understand because we empathize. It's kind of connected. So the understanding leads to empathizing, potentially, but also empathizing is kind of similar to understanding. Empathizing is kind of the emotional side of the understanding. So the understanding is the rational side of the understanding, and the empathizing is the emotional side. So it's kind of the same thing. So understanding is the rational understanding, and empathizing is the emotional understanding, if we want. But they are connected. So if you understand why your boss is pressuring you, because maybe he's himself being pressured, you will not judge him, you will not, but it's not that you will not hate him because you put effort in not hating him, or you try to convince yourself that you should not hate him because you're such a good person. You don't convince yourself, you don't put effort, you just understand. You focus on understanding, and whatever happens, happens. So you hate your boss, you try to understand why, and you may understand why. And once you understand why, it's very unlikely that you keep hating him, because hating is a form of judgment. But the judgment is not solved by another judgment. So it's not that you say, oh, I hate him, judgment, or well, we could say hating is more like an emotion. So you don't solve it by saying, oh, that's because he's an asshole, because that's kind of a final judgment. You have labeled him and put him in a little box which says asshole, and that gives you the right to judge him. But then you, at that point, you have completely decided to stop understanding. So you lose interest. And it's a pity, because by understanding him, you may realize that there is a little part of him in you, and there is a little part of you in him, because we are both humans. And so by understanding him better, you can understand yourself better. And by understanding yourself better, you can understand him better. And by the way, by understanding your boss better, you can understand your parents better. And by understanding your parents better, you can understand your boss better, because there is a little bit of everyone in everyone, not just between us and them, but also between them and them. So that's why the key is the understanding. In theory, the effort, if we have to put effort, it should be put, I would say, exclusively in the understanding, not in the forcing ourselves to do something we don't want or something we don't like, or to convince ourselves to believe something, to believe we love our parents if we hate them. If we hate our parents, we should accept it, say we hate our parents. But then that's the starting point. We accept that the starting point is that we hate our parents, and then we start to try to understand why. Or we hate our boss, we accept it, and then we start to understand why. And once we understand why, it's probably impossible that we have those strong negative emotions. I mean, we may dislike them because they are different than us, but it will be more a matter of incompatibility. We cannot really hate them, but again, it should not come through effort. Actually, the effort will be a negative. So if we put effort in trying not to do something, then we will not initiate the process of understanding, because the process of understanding starts by accepting the current initial situation. So by saying this is the current situation now, we can then start the process of understanding. But the judgment will block the process of understanding, because once we start to judge, then we stop understanding. And when we start understanding, then we stop judging. So especially people that they believe that they have to be good, or it's important to be good, it's really important not to force ourselves to be good. if we believe we are bad for whatever reason, and whatever bad means, if we hate people or whatever, it's fine. We shouldn't convince ourselves that we don't, or force ourselves not to. We should accept that we do, and then focus on the understanding, because what is going to change us is the understanding. So we are going to change because of the understanding process. By understanding more, we are going to change. We are not going to change by putting effort or trying to convince ourselves, because effort can only allow us to do things we don't like for some time. It's not going to produce change. What is going to produce change is understanding. By understanding ourselves and others, this is going to produce change. So everything else is kind of a symptom of the understanding. So that's why it's much more effective to work on the understanding, and the other things will unfold as symptoms. There is no point trying to put effort and focus on the symptoms, because they are just symptoms. They are just the result of a lack of understanding. Where we should focus is on increasing our understanding of ourselves and others, and then everything will unfold from there.